Hello and welcome along. So the final video on the Primarchs as characters within the Horus Heresy series. So these are going to be the best ones, the ones that I think really stand out as great characters throughout the series, have the best character arcs, the biggest influence on the heresy, deserve the credit for being in the top tier of Primarchs as literary characters. First one I'm going to go with is the last loyalist, which is Sanguinius. I think Sanguinius, again, is not written about enough in the books because he is, as I think I've said before in a previous video, him and Horus really are the main characters of the heresy, and they should have been written about more, probably, particularly. And I think Sanguinius gets even less than Horus written about him. He gets a reasonable amount compared to some of the other ones I've mentioned already, but he's just so much a better character than some of the others. So I think it would have made the series a lot better had they been more about Sanguinius, and particularly I think there's the Unremembered Empire book, which and books around there where they're kind of they're set in the what is then well it's Ultramar, but it's become Imperium Secundus, and he's the new emperor, but it's barely anything that he's talk. It doesn't do anything. Doesn't get nothing really happens. It's mostly about Conrad Kurz during that period, and a bit of political stuff for Gilliman and the Lion. But Sanguinius is barely involved, and I just think that could have been so much better if he'd have been given a more of a leading role in those books. And it would have been nice to have seen other stuff that he was doing, directly doing. It just seems like the writers kind of forgot about him a little bit and put him as just thought, well, we've got this brilliant character, but we don't really want to preempt the ending too much, so we want to keep him out of it. And everyone knows about the Sanguinius fighting Horus at the end, and so we'll just leave that bit for him and not do much in the whatever it's something like 10 years of build up to that. So I don't know. Yeah, so it would have been nice to have seen a bit more of Sanguinius. But when you do get a little bit of him actually in action doing something, then it's just amazing, and you're like, oh yeah, I need more of this. Then there's the four traitors. I think are the most interesting characters, the best characters in that sense, the biggest, the most influential, and the best written. And that is so Alpharius. He's always kind of there in the background doing stuff, doesn't he? He appears doesn't really get a huge amount of the spotlight. I think there's one book where he's like the main bad guy, the big bad in Rogel Dawn's book. What's it, Praetorian of Dawn, and he is really good in that. It's interesting, but he has lots of bit parts around the heresy books, which gives him a decent character building arc, and you get to you do get to see inside of his mind, which is famously hard to do for Alpharius, and you get to see some of his motivations and so on, and he's completely his motivations are completely different to everybody else's. All the other Primarchs are either loyal. Their motivation is to protect the Emperor, to be in the Imperium, or to worship. Well, worship's probably not the wrong word for a Primarch, but to aid chaos in their plans. Whereas his plan is obviously to do with his motivation of being informed by this group, the Cabal, who are these aliens who tell him that actually the best way to defeat chaos is to let them win, essentially, sort of. But it's very complicated. Anyway, the point is his motivations are therefore quite different from most of the other Primarchs, and he's also more complex than most of the other Primarchs. He's always everything's like a trap within a trap within a trap, everything's different to what it looks like on the surface, etc., and which makes him a more interesting character. And they do a good job, I think, in the books of developing his character and kind of building his motives and so on that you don't quite get with some of the other Primarchs. So that's why I put him in there. And like I said, he kind of is always an ever-present around in the background of the books. The next one is Horus, of course. Well, Horus it's his series, isn't it? So you do get a huge amount about Horus, obviously, because it's his book. Well, it's not his book, sorry. It's a book. It's his heresy, sort of. So that would make sense. And you do get a fair amount about him, and you really do see particularly in the early parts of the series, you get to see why he's doing stuff, who he was before the heresy, how he got to that position of actually doing the unthinkable and turning against the Emperor. You can see that, and it's well written. I like the way they've written his character arc. Someone who, to become a traitor, you would think was completely unthinkable, to actually justify it to themselves of why they're doing what they're doing, and that is done very well by the writers. And from a sense of influence on the story, obviously he has a huge influence on the story because he is the warmaster for start, and then he's the leader of the heresy, so he has massive influence in that sense. So that's obviously true. He is an interesting character as well. He's interesting to read about. I think again the writers actually do tend to center the stories that involve him from other people's perspectives, like his lead, the Astartes that are around him, or even other like civilians and so on, which is actually usually quite a good thing, because too much of a good thing will lead you to be bored of it, and they don't want you to, if it was all centered around Horus from the very beginning through the end, you'd probably get bored of Horus by then. So the way they give you enough of him to keep you interested, but don't overwhelm you with him, and kind of like keep you wanting a little bit more. So that's really good. So yeah, I think he has to be right at the top tier of like characters, best characters of the Heresy series. Now, I'll put him in. I think I'll put him in third. So I'm going to start numbering them now. So I'm going to say the other up to this point, they won't give him a number, but third best character of the Primarchs. There are other characters obviously in the books, but of the Primarchs, I think Horus would be third, and then second, I'm going to go for Magnus. So Magnus again is quite present throughout the books. He does a lot of bit parts appearing in other people's books or other books about other things, and then you'll suddenly get a pop off of Magnus, whether it's him in the early days or it's a shard of Magnus at some point in the other later ones. He has quite a lot of content. Although again, I like Magnus. I would have liked to have seen a lot more books centered around Magnus and Thousand Sons, but that's probably just me, or well, the people that are Thousand Sons fans. But I think because he's such a huge character and has such an influence on what's going on, and has almost like the outside view of what's going on compared to a lot of the other characters in the books, it would have been more. I think would have been even more interesting to see more of him, particularly more of him before he turns to Chaos. Because I think he's more interesting as a character before he turns to Chaos than after, and I think it would have been nice to have seen more of that Magnus. And I think him exploring his relationship with the Emperor, why the Emperor treats him the way he does, why he keeps him in the dark about the true nature of the warp. So Magnus is so connected to the warp, so deeply connected to the warp, that the fact that the Emperor kept the true nature of the warp from him seems kind of silly if you think about it. And it would have been nice to get more of that early interaction of Magnus and the Emperor. They communicated with each other through the warp before he'd even discovered any of the Primarchs, and so in many ways they had the closest relationship. And although obviously Horus was discovered first and the Emperor builds this kind of close relationship with him, it's really Magnus that was discovered first, because he's communicating with Magnus before he even finds any of the Primarchs. So, and it's Magnus that knows the most about what's actually going on, and Magnus, who is in many ways the Emperor's closest confidant. But still, as the Emperor does, he keeps a lot of information from Magnus, and that leads to Magnus being tricked by Chaos and eventually to his fall. And of course to him messing up the Webway project and so on. So, but Magnus is always trying to do the right thing all the way out through, and that's what makes him such an interesting character, because he wants to save the Imperium, he wants to save the Emperor, he wants to stop Horus from turning, and he wants to stop the influence of Chaos that seems to be spreading. He's always trying to do the right thing, and of course he's being betrayed by multiple different people. He's been betrayed by Chaos without his knowledge, obviously, from the very beginning. He's been betrayed by his brothers. He's been betrayed by the Emperor in many ways, who just kept him so much in the dark that it kind of led to all these events happening. So he's a very tragic hero in many ways. He's like the guy that tried to do the right thing, but constantly gets let down by everyone else. And that's what makes him such a great character. He's also, I think, one of the better written characters, because he's written by Graham McNeill, who I think he's one of the better writers in the group of writers that writes the series. And weirdly enough, he's actually, as far as I know, he's a Space Wolves fan. So he had to write the Thousand Sons and Magnus, which is interesting. He wrote them quite, not just that he wrote them well, because he's a professional writer. You'd like to think that would be the case, but he writes them quite sympathetically, I think, which is good. So he doesn't. I think, and I believe that's the reason why he did write them, is because they wanted to avoid the opposite of that, which is when I think Dan Abnett is the guy that wrote the Space Wars books, which is Prospero Burns, where he wrote the other side of the story, but he's actually a Thousand Sons fan, so they kind of got together and talked it over, but they wrote the opposite sides to the Legion that they actually preferred, and that was to kind of avoid fanboying and writing up your heroes. So that's quite interesting. I thought, and also they both did a great job of writing the kind of building out the characters of the two Primarchs and the Legions, particularly the Legions themselves. But yeah, so there's my thoughts on Magnus, and why he's probably, I'm going to put him as second greatest character out of the Primarchs within the series. And then number one, it has to be Lorgar. So why Lorgar? Well, because he's the one that he grows the most from the very beginning of the books. He's involved quite early on in the series and in the Heresy. In the reality, the Heresy, he's involved earliest, I think, of all the Primarchs. He is kind of the first traitor Primarch before anybody else even really knows what's going on or could go on. They don't have no knowledge of what's going on before. So he's already seeking out the Chaos Gods. He's trying to search for this truth, that to replace his faith in the Emperor that he's lost because of the way he's been treated by the Emperor. He's been crushed and humiliated early. Before any of the heresy starts, he's in the really, I think it's even 30, 40 years before this, he's gone on this journey. It's kind of, in many ways, a spiritual journey, some sort of way to find some reason for the universe, some sort of higher power. He needs that. It's deeply part of who he is. And he's very well written by they write him in a way that you think that this guy is really despised, pathetic individual, that he's even kind of surpassed by his own Astartes. Erebus is clearly in the driving seat throughout these early time of his Lorgar's journey. Corphoron again they're almost more capable than he is in many ways, intellectually at least, and which is weird when you think he's a Primarch. It just shouldn't be possible, but he's such a pathetic little worm that it is. But as time goes on, he grows and grows and grows, and then he outstrips them, and in many ways he outstrips most of the Primarchs as well. I think an interesting story arc of his is this kind of duo that he creates with him and Angron, where they go around Ultramar destroying stuff, where he's the driving force in this. What's going on? Angron is just there for the ride. And he takes him along with him, and he eventually saves Angron by turning him into a demon Primarch, without Angron really knowing what's going on, of course. And he does some very impressive feats with his newfound sorceress powers. But it's not just his power that grows; it's his personality that grows. He grows as he becomes much from someone who's completely has no confidence at all to someone who's. He's very confident, knowledgeable, wise even, which is not really what he was before. He was always intelligent and curious, but he was never wise. And he grows into that wise kind of sage, if you like. So I think he has the greatest arc. And obviously he's incredibly influential on the heresy because he kind of plants the seeds for it, along with, obviously, the leading members of his legion, like Erebus. But he is there, as I said before, the other Primarchs. And another reason why Magnus is one of the major characters. Magnus is tries to steer him away from this. He tries to save Horus from turning to Chaos, of course. He tries to save, and he's like this close to doing it as well. So, big influence there. But he also, in the earlier days, he sees kind of Lorgar going down this path, because Lorgar asks him about more questions about the warp and things, and he tries to warn him about it. He tries to stop him, and he thinks he's successfully done that, but he obviously hasn't, because Lorgar can't give up on this idea. So I think, a huge influence of Lorgar on the storyline, a huge character growth, and he's very well written. I think First Heretic is one of the best books in the series, and a lot of it is about the word bearers, their story, and particularly Lorgar. And I think Erebus is features a lot in that book. But that's one of the better books. I mean, they're all pretty good. Maybe I'll do another video at some point about which books aren't actually that good in the series. But generally they're good. But First Heretic, I think, is one of the ones that stands out as being one of the best. So there you go. So that's my rundown on the Primarchs as characters in the Horus Heresy series, and Lorgar is number 1. Thank you very much. If you could comment, like, subscribe, share, it'd be great. And let's see you next time.